From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
My name is Lynn Neary, and I cover books and publishing for NPR. This is the second year that I have been part of the National Book Festival, and it's an event I'm really learning to enjoy because last year when I came here, I kept bumping into friends and colleagues and neighbors and people whose kids went to school with my kid, and it just made me feel like I was really part of a great reading, book-loving community here in Washington, D.C. So I think it's just a great event. It also gives me a chance to bump into some of my favorite authors, one of whom is sitting right here next to me. Richard Russo, you all know him. I found when I told people that I would be interviewing Richard Russo, everybody had a favorite book. Everybody immediately came up with a favorite book of his, whether it was The Risk Pool, From the Risk Pool to Straight Man to Bridge of Sighs. And of course, his latest book, Everybody's Fool, is a sequel to the hugely popular Nobody's Fool. Of course, that was made into a movie, so a lot of people were introduced to it through the movie, starring Paul Newman, unforgettable, of course, as Sully, who is maybe the most unforgettable character that Richard Russo has created. And then, of course, there is my own personal favorite, and I think a lot of people's personal favorite, the Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, Empire Falls. How did I guess that? And again, Paul Newman had a major role in that movie, so I don't know what your relationship was with Paul Newman, but he has turned some of your characters into very unforgettable, it was made into an HBO miniseries, actually, into great TV and film characters as well. I like to think of you, Richard Russo, as the bard of the working class. I think you know what it means to be a working class guy because you grew up in a town that prosperity had sort of passed by. As I understand it, Gloversville, am I saying that right?
That's right.
I'm assuming I am because they made gloves.
They did indeed.
and then no more. So I wonder what it is about these small towns in America, these sort of, we pass through them sometimes on trips and they're kind of gloomy and depressing looking, but you're fascinated by them. What keeps bringing you back to that setting?
Well, I think that, I am fascinated by these towns. And, I've given Gloversville half a dozen different names during the decades that I've been writing about it. I've called it Mohawk and North Bath and Thomaston and even Empire Falls, despite the fact that Empire Falls is technically in Maine. You all recognize it, right? I keep going back there. And I think it has something to do with the fact that, there are all kinds of ways that we learn things. When we're young, I think the world is deeply wonderful and deeply mysterious. And the older we get, the less mysterious it becomes because we see things happen repeatedly. And repetition causes us to believe that the world is not the miraculous place that it seems like to a child. As a child growing up in Gloversville, New York, the things that I was observing as a child were things that I didn't understand and couldn't articulate. Mm-hmm. Why did my grandfather have to work so hard? Why, as a result of the work that he did he get sick and die so young? All families are mysterious, aren't they? Mm-hmm. My folks split up when I was young, so I was one of those. I was the only person I knew, the only kid I knew that was from a broken family in that way. And yet my family was not broken. My grandparents were there, my aunts and uncles and my cousins were there. And so I was, as a kid, growing up, from being a small boy to being a 17, 18-year-old when I left Gloversville to go to the university. During that time, I was asking myself in a very childlike way, answers to questions that don't have answers, really. And that's part of the mystery and the wonder of childhood, is you ask yourself these, without even articulating them exactly, you ask yourself these questions that do not have answers. As I say later on, you go to the university, you read books, you become more sophisticated, and there is all that repetition, as I said, but the effect of that is to make you feel like you know something.
Don't.
The
older you get, the more you know.
You don't.
Right?
You don't. And so we have more knowledge as we grow older. But for me anyway, it's always going back to those initial questions about my family, about the way people worked back there in these towns without ever seeming to prosper very much. The very sense that you get in a community that nobody really cares about you. You watch television and there's nobody like you on there. People are doing the kinds of work that nobody in your community does. And yet, you realize that these are the people that you love more than anything else in the world. And so it just seems to me like the most natural thing in the world to keep going back, to keep trying to get some answers to these questions that baffle a child.
Have you really gotten some answers? Have you worked through some answers for yourself by writing these books? Have you come to some conclusions?
I have replaced questions with other questions. Let's put it that way. I always feel like, and this is an example I use, but often. But you look at a writer like Dickens, and this majestic career that Dickens had, but he has, I don't want to say he has a narrow bandwidth, because in terms of subject matter, his bandwidth is huge. But he keeps coming back to certain themes of poverty, of child abandonment. All those Dickens novels, so full of orphans. I just want to say, well, come on, what's with what's with orphans? And it comes back to the fact that Dickens, at some point, was when his father was about to go to debtor's prison, got kind of sold off. He became an orphan. He was put in that blacking factory where as a sensitive kid, he felt abandoned there by the very people who should have loved him. And so that sense of him as a vulnerable child, as an orphan child, remained with him throughout his entire career. And you trace his writing about that throughout all of those books. And I think you find a man answering certain questions, but the answers to those questions pose other questions, and they tend to be in the same bandwidth, the same range of concerns that you just never have. And you know what? The fact that you can't get those answers, that's the good news.
Why is that the good news?
Because that's where these books come from. I think that that's where those of you in the audience who are not writers, I think when you read books, I suspect, and I've talked with a lot of readers, I think that you all suspect that we write books to tell you what we know. And at least, it might be true for some writers, I write these books not to tell you what I don't know. I write these books to explore what I don't know. Mm-hmm. And so if I ever get to the point where I have answers to my questions, I'm going to be shit out of luck as far as and I'd like to think so will you.
You'll be writing more nonfiction.
Because no, I think we write out of curiosity, and I think we write out of ignorance, and out of a lot of other motivations. But it's not a show-offy thing, or it shouldn't be. It's not. Yeah.
Well, okay. In Everybody's Fool, you return to a very specific town. Mm-hmm. Not only the town based on the real town you grew up in, but to North Bath, which you created first for Nobody's Fool. And I read Nobody's Fool right before I read Everybody's Fool. I wanted to remind myself of all the territory and the characters.
Yeah,
And,
I did the same thing, by the way.
well, we'll talk about that. But so the expectation coming out of Nobody's Fool, for me anyway, and I think for a lot of readers, was it was going to be about Sully again. And Sully's a major character. But at first I was a little surprised and disappointed when I realized, well, he's talking an awful lot about Doug Raymer.
Right.
And Doug
right.
Raymer was this kind of bumbling young police officer in the first book, and now he's the police chief. And he was not a particularly likable character. And at first I thought, why is he doing that? And then I got to like Doug Raymer. So I wanted to hear that process for you as a writer. At some point I thought, how did he do that? How did he get me to like this character that I kind of didn't like in the last book?
Yeah. I think we all have that feeling about books where we're initially resentful if something doesn't go the way that we had anticipated that it was going to go. And it can happen sometimes 4 or 5 times within the same novel. You know, you start a novel, you get caught up with a character, you read the first long chapter, which is maybe 45 pages or something like that, and you're so caught up with the character, and there's a space break or a chapter break, and the first word in the new chapter is somebody else's name. And you realize, oh, wait a second, we're going to a whole new character and maybe a whole new place. And our sense of resentment when that happens is terrific, because what you're feeling is, no, I was happy where I was. Don't take me somewhere else. I loved it there. I loved Sully. You're never going to make me as happy with Doug Raymer as I was with Sully. And that's a challenge for a writer, because you know that this has happened to you, and so you know it's going to happen with other people too. And the challenge is that if you're going to take me someplace new, or if you're going to focus me on somebody else when I want to be focused on, well, you really got to deliver the goods then, because you're already starting in this place for the reader of deep resentment. And from the writer's standpoint, you have to say, well, whatever I'm giving these folks who are initially disappointed, it better be good. It better be the place that I'm going to take you had better be as good as the place that you left. And the person that I'm going to ask you to focus on had better be as worthy of that attention. And Doug Raymer in the earlier book was just, number one, he was just a pawn on the board. He was a foil for Sully.
Right.
Someone to get angry at.
Yeah.
And who would have suspected that such a man even had an inner life that you would that you would want to spend time with? So Lynn, I think what you're saying is probably what everybody in the audience who's read this book has felt was, why is he betraying us this way? He's teasing us with Sully in the first Sully chapter, saying, Sully's just been given a diagnosis. This is not a spoiler. It's in the early going of the book if you haven't read it. Sully, now 70 years old, has been given a not terribly surprising diagnosis, health diagnosis. And so here's a character that you love and is being immediately put in jeopardy. And what does this dick of an author do? He says he's going to give us a minor character from the first novel that we don't care a damn thing about and ask us to care. But Doug Raymer, in fact, did have and does have an inner life. And he's in a horrible position. And he's been told his entire life that he is a fool by people who care about him, and also by people who don't. And he is at a point in his life where he is either going to have to discover that he's not as big a fool as everybody claims he is, and that he thinks he is, or his life is over. Everything is at stake for him. And what I discovered was, the longer I spent, and this happens to me a lot, but the longer I spend inside somebody's thoughts and fears and aspirations, the more I come to care. And what I have to hope when I'm foolish enough to do something like this, to ask you care about somebody when you have reasons, good and sufficient reasons not to. What I have to do is believe that I can convince you that this person is worth spending time with and maybe investing some emotional attachment to.
I got really emotionally attached to Doug Raymond.
Thank you.
I'll say.
Thank you. So did I.
What made you want to go back to Sully? What is it you wanted to explore about Sully again as a character? This is, again, for those of you who haven't read the book but maybe thinking about it, this is just, I was thinking, is irascible the right word? I'm not sure that's the right word, but I love using that word, so it gives me the opportunity to do so. But, he's just, he's a guy that's just kind of a laborer, really, a construction worker, and does all the dirty jobs and drinks a lot and, lets people down. But he's a smart guy, and you get to really like him in both of these books. Why did you want to go back? What did you want to discover about, and what's changed about him, do you think? Besides the fact that he now gets along with Doug Raymer, actually.
Well, well, one of the obvious reasons for going back and writing this book and resurrecting Sully is that Sully, like one or two other of my rogue male characters that you can kind of trace through Dallas Younger in the first book and Sam Hall in the second, and then Sully in the third, all the way through Max Roby, in Miles's father in Empire Falls, and now revisiting Sully again. One of the principal advantages, one of the principal reasons to do something like that is that all of those characters were based to a large extent on my own father, who in real life I just never got enough of in a way. He and my mom split up when I was young, and so I spent most of my youth kind of longing for a man who wasn't around. And he became more interested in me around the age of 18 because back then in New York you could drink at 18.
That's right. Grew up in New York too. Right?
Yeah. So I became more interesting to my father when I was old enough to drink. And so during my college years, when I came back and was working road construction with him, I really got to know him and got to know what made him tick, and we became good friends. In a way, it wasn't. I mean, there was a father-son aspect to our relationship. But it was more complex than that because we hadn't been father and son for so long. And because and it wasn't that long after that he became ill. And so I just kind of never got my fill of the man. And so returning to North Bath and resurrecting Sully was, at one level, kind of Psych 101 level, was just a way for me to spend more time with my father. The other interesting thing, though, about this was that because the wonderful Robert Benton movie was made of that novel, I was not only able to resurrect Sully, my character, and my father, the real person whom this book was based on, but I also got to resurrect Paul Newman, I worked with Paul on 3 different movies. I wouldn't say we had like an intimate friendship or anything like that, but we saw the world in the same way, and he really liked writers a lot, and I discovered in resurrecting Sully that because of his incredible portrayal of my character, I no longer had sole proprietorship over Sully anymore, because in every scene that I wrote, when I was writing Nobody's Fool, in every scene I was seeing my father. Now I'm seeing, he goes back and forth between seeing my father and seeing Paul Newman, who, by the way, looked nothing like my father. You can imagine, you can imagine my mother's surprise when Paul Newman was cast to play her husband. I mean, it's just, the mind boggles. So there was this there was this, and and the entire book is about the whole book takes place over Memorial Day, and it's a book about memory.
Yeah.
And so until I began writing it, I didn't realize what the upside to this book was going to be, and that it was going to plumb depths in me and needs in me that I just didn't suspect until I actually began writing it.
So this raises another question. I was wondering about this, exactly what you just brought up, because I had a hard time getting Paul Newman out of my head, too. And I don't know that that's who I would have imagined had he not been there to begin with, because
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
I saw the movie first. But Philip Seymour Hoffman
Yeah.
played Doug Raby.
Doug Raymer, yeah.
Doug Raymer, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah.
And so is he now in your head?
Oh God, yes.
And as you were writing the book, were you
Yes.
actually seeing him? Because he was in the original movie.
Yes, yes.
So what does that do to you as a writer when you...
Well, it was interesting, Lynn, because we got the terrible news about Philip's death. I was probably 250, 300 pages into the book.
Wow.
And of course, that's who I've been thinking about. And while as a writer, as a novelist, I know better than to cast a novel when I'm writing it, because even if the actor that I'm thinking about wanted to play the role, the odds against it are still enormous, because actors of that caliber, they do 2 or 3 movies a year sometimes, and the chances that Philip Seymour Hoffman would be available and would have the interest in playing Raymer in a movie, those are pretty long odds. But he not only played Raymer, but then he went on after that, of course, to play a major role in Empire Falls, and it was just impossible not to see him. And it was also impossible not to, keep it in the back of your mind as far as you can. But what if he were able to play this role?
Yeah.
Because seeing him the way I was seeing him, I was also imagining something of not only my character's inner life, but just how wonderful Philip Seymour Hoffman always was in his career, in playing people who had kind of almost paralytic self-doubt. I mean, think of the great roles that he had. And so many of them were about people who were in a state of almost paralysis as a result of insecurity, fear, self-doubt. And so there he was. And then we got the news of his death, and I thought, all right, now what do you do? It wasn't the obvious that, now there's no chance. Obviously, the man is dead. He's not going to play Raymer in the movie. It didn't have anything to do with anything like that. It was, I thought, now what do I do with what's in my head? Mm-hmm. What do I do with the fact that I'm seeing this man? What should I do? Should I start now thinking in terms of somebody else? And for a while, I tried to. It was just impossible. And so I thought, you know what? Let him be the muse. Yeah. Because with these characters, when I think back on all of my fictional characters, not one single actor has ever been chosen that I would have chosen had I been in charge of casting. Ed Harris in Empire Falls, what a wonderful job that he did. But the man I had described in Empire Falls, my novel of Empire Falls, a man who had been literally eating his mistakes for most of his life. Whenever he makes a mistake at the grill, there's nothing left to do but eat it. And the man that I had described, if you'd been casting on my physical descriptions, would have been, I don't know, James Gandolfini, somebody like that, a big guy. He's throughout the book, he's referred to as Big Boy. Yeah. But the first, and then they cast Ed Harris, trim little buff Ed Harris. And I thought, what in the world are they thinking? Were they going to make him wear a fat suit? I just couldn't get it. I couldn't get it in. I couldn't see it. And then we went on the set. My daughters and my wife and I went on the set, and we saw a daily. And one of the dailies was a shot. Was a scene with him. It took place in the diner, and it was a scene with him and his beautiful daughter. And the way he looked at her, I thought, there's Miles. There's Miles. And so when you write to a particular kind of actor, what you're seeing is something physical, but what they're going to bring to the role, if it's a great actor, is not physical at all. Mm-hmm. And so at some point that wisdom dawned on me, I guess, that it was just perfectly fine to see Philip Seymour Hoffman in my mind, because some great actor is going to come and find something in that character, and if he doesn't look like the guy in my head, it doesn't matter.
All right, I've got one more question for you before I open it up for questions from the audience, because this is something I talked about with you one other time. I met you in May. I was thinking as I was reading your books recently that they span several decades, and yet over those several decades, in each of these towns, they've already gone through a period where the industry has left. They're bereft. People are leaving the town because there's no jobs there.
Right.
People are scrounging for a living. And yet here we are in this election cycle, 2016, and the issue of jobs leaving the country, going elsewhere, is still an issue. It's not a new issue. And I was struck by the fact that this issue has actually been around for, not years, decades. And I know you have some thoughts about your own characters who are working class white guys, and what they may or may not do, might or might not do in this election year. And I'm curious if you could just address that question.
Well, here's an opportunity to alienate half the audience.
Sorry.
That's
It is Washington, D.C., after all.
Well, no, I do feel like my novels, what I've been writing about in my novels since, for a very long time now, since the early 1980s. I've been writing the same thing, but because Gloversville, the town that I grew up in, which lost all of those manufacturing jobs back in the 60s, it was all over by the end of World War II. In a way, Gloversville, New York, I've come to think of it as the canary in the coal mine. It was happening there then, but since that time, it is just, the story of Gloversville, New York has just expanded exponentially. And I think that now suddenly everybody is talking about what I've been talking about. And it seemed to me that throughout all of these years, I kind of had this subject, not to myself, but let's put it this way: the field was not overly crowded.
Right.
And now suddenly, as you say, with this election cycle, suddenly everybody is talking about work. Suddenly everybody is talking about the fact that in America we don't seem to make things anymore, that all of these jobs have been outsourced, manufacturing jobs in particular have been outsourced. And that all of this that's now coming home to us as a nation is suddenly front and center in a political political campaign, and the rage that we're feeling as a result of this is pretty astonishing. And in upstate New York and in a lot of the Rust Belt, it was interesting because I think we tend to see that, and certainly Donald Trump did very well in the Rust Belt. In upstate New York, there was, as it's always been, there's New York City, and then there's everywhere else. And Donald Trump did very well throughout that swatch of the Mohawk Valley, all the way through Buffalo, and straight on through into Ohio and all of that. What's not been reported quite so widely is that Bernie Sanders did very well there too, and the anger, I think, in both the Trump camp, as a result of these loss of manufacturing jobs, many of them had been traditionally white male jobs. The anger in both the Trump camp and the Bernie Sanders camp, it's both there. It's just a question of who you blame. The Trump folks blame one group of people, and the Sanders folks blame another group of people. And I was asked once, you know, who would my characters, now I'm talking sociologically, but who would my characters have voted for? And, you know, we won't go through all of them, but I will say this. Miss Burl, in Nobody's Fool and in Everybody's Fool, she wouldn't have been fooled by Donald Trump for a second.
I think she would have been for Hillary myself.
And I think Sully would have understood the anger. But he was based on my father. My father was a D-Day guy, and he had done his service all the way from Utah Beach to Germany, and he knew what service was, and I don't think he'd have been fooled either.
Okay. I think people want to ask questions, so if you do, there's mics right here.
I don't know if it works. Maybe, so that's better. Years ago, I went to see a movie, and it had people I liked in it. It was, what was it, Ice Storm.
The Ice
and
Harvest.
It had
Yep.
Billy Bob Thornton. I liked that. And then it had you as a writer, and I said, wow, this is really going to be good. But it's not particularly your style. It's more of a film noir kind of thing.
Yeah.
How did you write differently for that?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, the question is about a film called The Ice Harvest, which I'm so glad you saw it. I was wondering who the other person who saw that movie was. I loved it. It had a terrible black humor to it, and based on a novel by Scott Phillips, which I loved. And so when the assignment came to me, I was thrilled to get it. I think what attracted me to that movie was the darkness of it, the humor of it. And when I signed on to write it, one of the principal tasks for me, because the book was so dark, much darker than anything I had ever written, was to infuse it, because movies are not books, and so you will find, if you were to look at the movie and then read the novel and compare the dialogue, you would find some lines in there that were not in the book. And it would be interesting for you to compare them and see what you see. What is Scott Phillips in the movie, and what is Richard Russo? It's probably more effort than anyone would want to expend. But thank you for that question. I really loved that movie, and I thought John Cusack was particularly wonderful in it.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi.
And they're very funny.
Go
Lower,
ahead.
is this better? We're doing this book in our book club.
Which one?
Everybody's.
Okay.
And but just last month we read a book where one of the issues was reinventing oneself.
Mm-hmm.
When I think about these in your books, nobody seems to be interested in reinventing themselves, really. In fact, they don't even seem interested in evolving as they grow older. So, and that sort of goes with the question, the political question. I mean, the Rust Belt, there may have been opportunities to change your life, but most people stayed in there the way they are.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering what thoughts about that, if you have any thoughts about that, do you intend it? I mean, you clearly like your characters, and we like them when we
Mm-hmm.
read them. But on the other hand, they're sort of stuck in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if you can make a comment about that.
Well, I tell people, and I think it's true, that I am the poster boy for the American dream. I am a product of public schools, public institutions. because of the fact that there were so few opportunities in upstate New York and the town where I grew up in general, almost everybody in my graduating class, both the public and Catholic high school, wherever I go, I see people from my hometown because they simply, the vast majority of them they had to reinvent themselves. And I spent a long time. I went all the way to the University of Arizona, which will give you an idea of how far I wanted to get away from upstate New York. And I was there doing various degrees for about 10 years. And I considered it my mission, in large part because it was my mother's mission. She tried most of her adult life to get out of Gloversville and always ended up right back where she started. It was her mission for me to do what she couldn't do, which was to escape this place. Ha ha. And part of that, in order to do that, it's not just getting away geographically, it's reinventing yourself. It's becoming a different person. And with every degree that I got a BA, an MA, a PhD, and then after a PhD, I actually went back and got an MFA in writing, in fiction writing, and the idea was that with every one of those degrees, I would distance myself even further by reinvention, by becoming a person that no one would recognize back home. I would reinvent myself and distance myself. Only to discover, of course, my one true subject, right? So you reinvent yourself, and for so many of the people that I write about, reinvention is they had all they could do to invent themselves the first time. They haven't had the opportunity for reinvention. Sully in this book, in the earlier book, discovers that when he falls off that ladder and shatters his knee, he has the opportunity to go back to community college and learn something like refrigeration repair, and finds himself at age 60 in a classroom full of 18-year-olds. And he manages about 2 classes before he quits. Reinvention for Sully at age 60, having done the same thing all of his life. And that's politically part of the dilemma with all of those manufacturing jobs that have left the country. You say that, educated people say, well, look at the writing on the wall. Those jobs are not coming back. Learn to do something else. What do you mean, learn to do something else at that age when you've done that work all of your life? And not only have you done it, you found meaning in doing it. That's the thing that I find astonishing about Sully. It's not that he's done the kind of shit jobs that nobody else wants to do. This is a guy who takes pride in doing those exact jobs. And for somebody to tell him, all right, well, somebody to come in and say, well, you should do something else. Really?
All right, we're going to go to another question.
Hi. So I read faster than you write, and so when I'm done with one of your books, I want another one as soon as possible. How long do I have to wait, and what are we thinking about writing?
You need to read slower. The good news, I suppose. Thank you first of all for the high compliment. I have a book of short fiction coming out next year. I've delivered it to my editor earlier. It will come out in May. I'm finishing up a book of essays about life and art that I will be delivering in about 3 or 4 weeks. And I have in the back of my brain a little bent gene or something that feels like it could be a novel, but I'm a couple of months away from being able to begin it. And at any rate, it takes me a while to write these things. So you got a couple of books that are coming that will allow you to pedal kind of in a stationary, 2 books that amount to a kind of stationary bicycle, and I've got sort of an idea.
Okay. All right, we'll take this question here.
Hi.
Hi.
Straight Man is one of my all-time favorite books.
Thank
and
you.
It's just beautifully written and hilarious. And reading it is such an interesting experience because the main character is, he does things as if for his own humor. And you know, it's kind of like the reader and him like have a special relationship that no one else in the story seems to get. So I'm just hoping, can you just comment on the experience of writing that book and where it came from?
Sure. Straight Man, of all my novels, was much the easiest book of mine to write. I had been hitched to the academic sled for many years in a variety of institutions. And when I started writing Straight Man, it was as if the floodgates opened. All of my store of academic insanity stories, it was just suddenly all right there, and it just came gushing out. And part of it was William Henry Devereux, who was based on a real colleague of mine. And he was, by nature, I think, an anarchist. He just loved to stir the pot. And he lived life exactly that way, doing things for his own amusement and entertainment. And the academic shrapnel from that was amazing to behold and wonderful to behold. And so when I sat down to write that book, I just remembered him and the way he went about things, the gleeful way he would turn on his friends and support his enemies, as Hank does in that book. That material was all prepped. I didn't really have to. I mean, of all of my novels, that's the one there's the most verisimilitude. In some ways, it's the most outrageous. But I didn't have to invent anything in that book. It was just all there, pure reportage in that book.
All right, let's see if we can get one more question real quickly.
Thank you, and good afternoon.
Hi.
You spend a lot of time talking about movies. And
I'm sorry, talking about?
You spend a lot of time talking about movies.
Yeah.
And I was curious, when you write novels, do you aspire or even expect that they're going to be made into movies? And if so, how does that affect the way that you write them? Thank you.
You know, when I was a younger writer, I probably thought that one day maybe a movie would be made of mine. It didn't affect the way I thought of my novels, and I certainly didn't want to make the novel more movie-like in order to attract interest. So I've always kept one in one compartment and the other in another compartment. Lately, I think if you're a story-driven, character-driven literary writer, you'd be a damn fool to think of that a book of yours is likely to be made into a movie, because the movies have given themselves over to big budget, action-driven stuff. The real writing these days is being done on television. So, I mean, there are exceptions to that. There are some character-driven movies being made in the kind of $2 to $6 to $8 million range. But Nobody's Fool, all those years ago, 2 decades ago, was made. The budget for that movie was like $22 million. You couldn't get anybody today to spend $22 million making a movie like Nobody's Fool. That kind of money just isn't spent anymore. And so I don't even think about it. And I don't even think about it as a possibility. Every now and whenever anybody comes to my agent thinking about a book of mine now, it's as a limited television miniseries.
All right, on that note, I think we have to say farewell, and thanks so much
Thank
to
you,
Richard
Lynn.
Russo.
Thank you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.